the tape stopped, and can't remember exactly where I was, but from that moment on, when she gave the pin back to Glenn, and we started seeing each other quite often, and would go for a walk, or go get an ice cream cone, or go to the show. She, at that time, lived in one of the dormitories, because this was the end of her freshman year. And it wasn't until September that, or late freshman year, that she joined her sorority, Gamma Phi Beta. And in September, she moved into her sorority house, which was right close by where the dormitory was. As I said, this was the spring of 1952. We were leaving college the end of May, as I remember, sometime in May. So I had only known this lady for about 2 months, and I distinctly remember, after being with her and being just fascinated with her and her southern drawl that she attempted to get rid of because she took speech classes in order to dispense with the her southern accents, unfortunately. And I remember it like it was yesterday, that after about 2 weeks, when I was kissing her goodnight one time at the on the dormitory, great big, massive dormitory with a great big porch, where everybody was saying goodnight and kissing, and the boy on the outside and the girl against the brick wall, trying to push the damn wall down. That I said something silly to Betty Jane Kelly. I said, "I think I'm falling in love." I remember it as if it was yesterday. And I think we had pictures taken, fraternity pictures, and I had one that was blown up, and I think one of them is downstairs on the wall. This young man, the brush cut, and a very unusual happening, a tie and a sport coat on, for the fraternity picture. And so I had an enlarged picture that I was going to take home and give to my mother and father, so they'd remember what I looked like. Well, Miss Betty Jane wanted a picture. So when we were leaving, when the semester was over, I, having whichever car, doesn't make any difference, I was going right by her house on the way home, and she had this picture. It must have been 8 by 10, something like that. And so I dropped her off. Her parents weren't home at the time. I think they were both at work. And I do remember this, and we'll go into further detail in a little bit here. I do remember that her parents told me later that when she was tired, so she laid down on the couch and had this picture of Donald Coon on the table that she was looking at, and she fell asleep. Well, when her parents got home, they roused her and said, "Who's this guy?" I think they knew. But she had fallen asleep on the couch with me within her eyesight. Very nice. But these are little things that I recall even now, having heard or seen or done. And that's where it all began, guys. Now, as I, excuse me, as I alluded to earlier, that summer, the summer of '52, I got home, I got the job at Eastern States, did my thing until 4 or 5 o'clock on Saturday, borrowed Mom and Dad's car, and they got my coupe or my sedan, whichever one I had at the time. And I think it was the sedan by then, because if they were going out on the weekend or Saturday night, why they both would have had trouble sitting in that confounded sedan or coupe. But I used their car, and I drove to Cleveland every single Saturday night. And my recollection is that the Cleveland Indians usually played at home on Saturday night, or when they did, I think it was when the little things, when the shadow of the sun setting, and they could watch TV, they could watch the Indians playing, whomever they were playing, and when the shadow from the stadium roof reached over the pitcher's mound is about the time that I pulled up in the driveway. And Mom, Betty, Jane always knew about when I was going to show up, because it was like clockwork as to when I got there. And I think it was also on Sunday afternoon when that same shadow was, maybe when that same shadow was going over the pitcher's mound is when I had to leave. So when the Cleveland Indians were in town, shadows over the pitching mound, coming on Saturday night, going on Sunday night, was when I left. And the reason I say I went up there every weekend during that summer until we went back to school in September, end of August, early September. There was only one weekend when I didn't go. And that was the weekend that a man who had dated Betty Jane, Mom, back in Norfolk, was a Marine officer attached to the naval station there in Norfolk. And I think he may have met her at the dance or the choir that she sang in at the naval base, she and Alice. And he had gone to Korea and was returning home. I think he was from his parents' home was in Denver. So he got in from Korea, flew to Denver, flew to Cleveland, spent a week or the weekend or whatever, with the Kelly family, and that was the weekend that I didn't go up. Well, funny thing happened, something that was very encouraging, because I think he was there, and I was home on a Saturday night, and the telephone rang, and it was Betty Jane Kelly. Well, Roger Barnard, that's his name. Roger Barnard was in taking a shower, and she took that occasion to call me and say that Roger was there, but she was thinking of me and wanted to let me know. Well, that kind of gave me a clue as to where hopefully her heart was, and that encouraged me even more. We really didn't do an awful lot during that 24-hour period, except have dinner, I guess, Saturday night, maybe. Or they had already eaten, and maybe I got some leftovers. But we sat out on the back porch and played a lot of kissy face and all that sort of thing, and slept in for the most part on Sunday morning. But we just spent an awful lot of time together by ourselves, doing a lot of talking and just a normal thing that lovers talk about. I was impressed with her family, her mother, Clarence, and Lolita. And I think they were with me, and I think they were pleased that their daughter met a nice young man. They often said so. Because Clarence was always working, and there were things around the house that needed to be done, and so during that period, why I would either do them or do them with Clarence and help out. So I was trying to be a nice young man and and romance her parents at the same time I was romancing her. When you work as hard as I did that summer and was in as good a shape as I said I was, I could work all day. I had to be there, I think at 7 o'clock in the morning. So I didn't go out much during that summer, during the week, because all I could think of was getting to Cleveland on Saturday evening, and that sure kept me going. This went on all summer, and I don't recall exactly, but I'm sure that when it came time to go back to school in the fall, I'm sure I drove my car, whichever one it was, and picked Betty Jane up, and we both went back to Bowling Green. We were pretty much inseparable during my 4, 8, 9th semester and her 3rd semester. Spent an awful lot of time. We'd take a walk downtown, and as young couples often do, we would walk by, go to the show, or go get an ice cream cone or a Coke or that type of thing. And we'd walk by jewelry stores, and we'd both stop and look in, and I would get an idea of what her preferences were, because we'd look at different rings, as jewelers often did in their window display. So I had a pretty good idea that she didn't like yellow gold, but liked white gold. Platinum was out of any possibilities. Let's see, I do remember being soundly criticized because I think that last year I was president of SAE, president of the SAE House. And I think when we left in May, I didn't have SAE on my mind, I had Betty Jane on my mind. And I was soundly criticized that 9th semester, the fall semester, because as president of the House, I was supposed to submit a long form, fill out a long form as to what we achieved and what we accomplished and how things went during my tenure as president of the House. And as I say, the other guys who took over from me kept bugging me. Coon, will you fill out the form and send it in? Yeah, I'll take care of it. I never did. So in the annals of SAE, on Sheridan Drive in Evanston, Illinois, in the national headquarters of SAE, there is a report from the year 51-52 that is blank. That folder is empty because the past president never filled it out and sent it in. And of course in January or December or whenever it was that I left, I still hadn't done it. And that's the end of that story. Now, for any of the boys, Don, Paul, or Larry, or Grands, or anybody else that might listen to this tape, one of the advantages is that they have a fast forward for anybody who's getting bored and anybody who I'll try to jot down on the face of these tapes what periods they cover. So any of you who are getting bored by this time and don't want to listen anymore or would like to fast forward, I don't know if you could fast forward to any of the good things. I don't know where the good things are, but nevertheless, you can fast forward and stop listening to the old man ramble on. Maybe I'm getting into greater detail, but all these things are very vivid in my memory, and I've made some notes and tried to follow in a chronological order. But as I say, if you're getting tired and you want to get further on without listening to the ramblings of an old man, why, so be it. For anyone listening to this or any of the other previous tapes, it would have been ideal, Don, for you to play this tape on a trip to Long Island. I don't know how long these tapes are going to take to listen to. Or Larry, a trip to Chicago. Or Paul, that ride to New York City to visit family, or to Connecticut. I can't remember where Jerry is. So if you listen to this instead of good music, you need a long trip, because I'm sure if you sat down in a comfortable chair at home and turned it on, you'd be asleep by now. Hey, wake up! Before I leave some of the stories about Bowling Green, I remind myself of another. I think I said earlier that I acclimated myself fairly comfortably to the ROTC program and the military. My grades in ROTC were rather high, and this served me well once I got to Korea, which I'll talk about sometime later. The reason I say that is because in the rankings, as military people have done over the years, our grades were the ones that helped determine your rank in the military structure at Bowling Green. And there were many parades, and you obviously had your uniform. Ironically, the two gentlemen that I mentioned earlier, Phil Getzman and Bob Conshafter, and Phil, by the way, got out, and I'll get to that later, got out of the military after 2 years, but then went back in and spent 22 years in the military, achieving the rank of lieutenant colonel. Because our grades helped to determine what rank we were, one gentleman, Niles Fulweiler, was the highest grade average in ROTC, so he was the chief honcho. But I think Conshafter, Getzman, and Coon were the next three. So we were staff members, and in the military you have the commanding officer, then you have G1, G2, and G3, and G4, covering various phases in a military unit. Well, anyhow, I was one of the top four, and that remained so until the old man, the colonel in charge of the ROTC program there at Bowling Green, found out that there were two guys, and I don't remember what Ward's ranking was, but both Ward and Coon were not going to finish up and be shipped out to Korea in the summer of '52, but were coming back for an additional semester, which I guess was obviously allowed at the time. Well, as soon as the old man found that out, I was stripped of my exalted rank and had to take the silver things off of my shoulder pads and had to sew on sergeant stripes, and then I was down with the troops. That really pissed the old man off, that I wasn't graduating and going to become a second lieutenant right away and go to Korea. So he did what I imagine anybody in his shoes would have done, was demote those people that had high ranks, regardless of what their grades were, and put them down down with the rest of the troops. And I think I still went to meetings and classes, and I think in my 9th semester. Yeah, maybe I did, maybe I didn't. Can't recall. In the fall of that 9th semester, the fall of 1952, I was to graduate in January of 1953. But Betty Jane and Mom and I were becoming closer and closer. And as I say, we looked in jewelers' storefronts as we walked into town. And I was serious enough to want to ask this young lady to marry me. And she lived in the sorority house, and one weekend in the fall, I can't remember, I think it may have been Thanksgiving, but I'm not quite sure. I said, well, I'm going home for the weekend. Well, most women are a hell of a lot smarter than most men. And she knew what I was going home for, because I had talked to my mother and father, and my mother, God bless her, in her little envelopes with money in it, I had told her I wanted to come home and get an engagement ring. So I came home on some weekend and maybe ate turkey, and maybe I didn't. But we went down to, again, a friend of Dad's in a jewelry store not too far away from Genesee Street, and it was on Genesee Street, right, just a stone's throw, just a few stores in from Washington Street. And so Mom and Dad and I went down there, and we looked at various rings and got estimates and sizes and all that kind of good stuff. And Mom loaned me the money from her cachet. And as I recall, the ring was about $200. Now that's back in 1952. I've since had the diamond appraised, and I think it was worth $1,000 or $2,000. And that's another story in itself. But I got the ring, came back to Bowling Green, and at some, I think I got the ring and came back. I think I was gentleman enough, I hope I was, that on one of the weekends that we oftentimes in the fall of '52 would ride to Cleveland. And on that occasion, I approached Clarence Kelly and said, "I'd like to marry your daughter, and I'm looking for your blessing." And he gave me his blessing. I think he was somewhat relieved because it meant that he didn't have to pay tuition come January of '53. So he gave me his blessing, and either that weekend or sometime back at school, I asked Mom to marry me, and she said yes. And that's the beginning of another story. And it was determined that neither one of us, I obviously would not be coming back for the 10th semester in the spring of '53, and Betty Jane, Mom, decided that she wouldn't either. So after we left Bowling Green when the semester was over, I would imagine my grades probably weren't too good that fall because I was in love and spending more time with Betty Jane than I was with the professors. So in January, we left college and came back to Cleveland. And we lived in Cleveland because I had orders to go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I'm pretty sure it was March or April, for my basic training in the advanced artillery school at Fort Sill. We both got jobs to sustain ourselves. I can't remember whether we paid Clarence and Lolita money for their allowing us to stay with them. Mom got a job with a firm, an insurance firm, ironically, in Cleveland. I think doing more filing work and that type of thing. I applied for a job at the Cleveland Cadillac tank firm. They stopped, obviously, during the Korean War, stopped making tanks, or stopped making Cadillacs, rather, and geared up to make tanks. Well, when I applied for the job, a lot of people were in the military, and so you had a young buck that could work for 2, 3, 4 months. They hired me. Well, Larry also moved back to Cleveland. He lived in an apartment, and Maggie lived in an apartment. They didn't live together because they were going to get married sometime in the spring also. And so we both applied to this Cleveland Cadillac company. And because I was a business major and had some accounting classes, I was given a job in the accounting department. Larry, because his degree was in liberal arts of some nature, he didn't have any business degrees at all. He was given a job, but he was given a job down on the floor making tanks. He was getting dirt under his fingernails, and all I was doing was pushing pencils. So I'd walk down and see him every once in a while. He was perspiring a lot more than I was. Because my job was so unimportant, but they had slots to fill, and I would get into work in the morning, and within 15 to 20 minutes, I had everything that I needed to do done. It wasn't that I was so efficient or brilliant. It was just that there wasn't anything for me to do. My job description called for me to do thus and so, and so when I did it. Now, if any of you have ever had a job where you had to look like you were busy, for 7.5 hours a day, I would take Reader's Digest. I'd take anything that I could read. I would spend 10, 15, 20 minutes in the bathroom just sitting there with my drawers down, reading. I think just like the folks that I worked with at Chevrolet who loved to pull pranks, I would come back to my desk and I could smell the most god-awful smell you'd ever want to smell in your life. It was almost like Limburger cheese. Well, I'm sure whoever planted whatever it was that smelled under my chair, under my desk, whatever, I would, trying to find the location of this, I would drop my pencil and I'd look under the desk, I'd look under the chair. Whoever had done it must have been laughing to himself, watching this crazy young kid trying to find out the source of this terrific odor. So they had their fun. I never did find out what it was. I never did find out where it was. I never did find out who did it. But they did it. So they had fun with this rookie. And so I think we worked there until we both worked, until March or April. I think it was April is when we left, when the next class was, when my orders showed that I was to be in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and outside of Lawton, Oklahoma, in the early 52. As you can well imagine, with my asking Clarence, Kelly, and Betty Jane to marry me in the late fall of 52, and our leaving school in January of 53, and what were our plans? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we both lived and stayed with the Kellys in Cleveland because it was a lot closer, and we made arrangements to be married in the chapel, Episcopal by faith, the chapel was, in March of 53. And you can well imagine trying to make plans, wedding dress, arrangements. Clarence, I think, was delighted that not only the wedding but also the reception was going to be in the sorority house there on campus, which didn't allow any liquor, so that saved him some nickels. But the wedding announcements going out back to Buffalo and back to Norfolk, and gifts that were coming in, pictures of which are downstairs, where we had them neatly arranged in the living room on the piano and around the house. And of course sending thank you notes. I'm not sure how much help I was, but probably did what I was told, hopefully. And then on the weekend of March the 7th, just 6 months prior to Betty Jane's birthday on 9/7, we were married in the chapel. We did find, or I found, a fairly recent graduate of Bowling Green who was an SAE and who was an Episcopal priest in Cleveland. And we had to get somebody's blessing, and going back and forth to Bowling Green wouldn't have made much sense. So we asked Reverend Dick Herrig in Cleveland and met with him and went through all the procedures in order to get married. Asked him to officiate at the wedding, which he did. He came back to college that weekend and must have partied big time on Friday night before the wedding on Saturday, because as I came in the side door with my best man, and I think Dave and Doug were both ushers, and I think Fritz Rudolph was my best man. And I came in and stood there as Betty Jane and Clarence, her father, came down the aisle. Beautiful lady. I experienced something coming from the fraternity house where I got dressed. She was in a beautiful gown. I was in a blue suit that I had. I didn't get a tux. I don't know why. Maybe I wasn't told to. But I experienced something that day that I had never experienced before in my life. In parking the car, coming from the fraternity house, and with my best man coming in the back entrance of the church, I physically felt cold feet. I mean, and this was not an unpleasant day, nor was it that cold. I don't think we had coats on. I think we just had our suits on. But I really experienced cold feet. So when people talk about getting married and getting cold feet, I experienced it. We lived and worked in Cleveland and lived with the Kellys. We did get married on March the 7th, and we were both broke. We didn't have any money. So God bless Clarence and Lolita, who gathered up after the wedding any gifts that were brought that hadn't been sent on. And after the wedding, we took off and went back to Cleveland, and they packed up all the gifts, and we're going to stay with friends of theirs in Dayton or some community nearby. But I think what they did was bring the gifts home, parked in the driveway, came in the back door, brought the gifts in. We were sound asleep after doing whatever we did, and didn't even know that they had shown up. They took off and went to stay with their friends, and so our honeymoon was there in Cleveland at their home for the balance of Sunday, and son of a gun if we didn't go back to work on Monday morning after they showed up sometime later Sunday afternoon. I guess our honeymoon trip was subsequent to that. I'm sure we got married in March. I'm sure it was in April that we took off and went to Oklahoma. By this time we had that larger 39 Plymouth sedan, and we had it packed to the gunnels with all the things, all the gifts that we thought we would use, and left home those that we figured we wouldn't use in our temporary quarters in Oklahoma. We had called and made arrangements with Clinton and Betsy Blanford in Clinton, Iowa, because they were right on the way. So we stopped and stayed overnight with them and met Libby and Corky and Betsy too, because I don't think we had met Betsy. I had, of course, known Cousin Clinton, but we stayed overnight with them, and they made a gracious, I think they gave us a catalog, maybe a Sears catalog or pennies or something like that, and said, when you get to Oklahoma, pick out something, and here's the form and everything else. Pick out what you want, have it sent to you, and there was their credit card, or they gave, I don't know what they did. Somehow we didn't have a card table in any of our gifts or down there, and so we selected and hand sent to us a round card table. I think we had it for many, many years. You guys may even remember it. After we left Clinton, Iowa, and headed for Oklahoma, I think we were going through Kansas, and my recollection was that as the gas gauge got lower and lower and towns became fewer and fewer, my lovely wife suggested that I stop and get gas, and males. Okay, honey, I'll do that the next. And then we'd either go buy one, and I'd forget about it. Well, anyhow, long and short of it, I ran out of gas, and it was hot, and it was out in the country. And here I had very little traffic, and so what I reluctantly did was leave this young bride in the car, all by herself, out in the country, out in the boonies, and I started walking. Well, fortunately, a man came along, saw my predicament, passed the car, saw me walking, and he graciously stopped, picked me up, took me to the gas station, and recollection is that either he or the gas station attendant or somebody there drove me back to the car, a very embarrassed youngster who learned one of his first lessons, or many lessons, but nevertheless, I was able to put the gas in the tank, drive on, fill up, and off we went. And I can say that in 47 years, I never ran out of gas again. We almost ran out of gas coming back from Rochester one, I think it was Labor Day or Memorial Day, when everything under the sun was closed, and we just limped into Buffalo. So sometimes the old man learns, and sometimes he doesn't. But I think that was maybe 45 years between running out of gas and almost running out of gas. When we finally arrived in Lawton, Oklahoma, I think we did have the address of a sorority sister of Mom's, Elsie, who had married a man who I had met through ROTC, Whitey Schaefer. I think Bob Conchafter was there, maybe Phil Getzman was there. They directed us to various apartment complexes, and we found an apartment and moved in. It was one of those fairly newly constructed, nice apartment. We were on the second floor. There was probably 8 or 10, almost like a row house, where the apartments were either upper or lower. One of the neighbors that we had downstairs was, and I can't remember his name, he has since passed on, but her name was Louise Palmer, and he was a little older. He was a man who had been in the reserves or National Guard, and so brought back into the military. And to this day, I think he was from Texas. I think she was from Virginia, and I think they probably met in the military at some place. But to this day, I still correspond. We did, and I now do, still correspond with Louise, who lives in Blacksburg, Virginia, where Virginia Tech is located, and possibly where one or more of her children are located. She may too have been from Texas. I don't just recall at this point, but we've had a nice correspondence at Christmas time over the years. As you can well imagine, it was pretty darn hot in Lawton, Oklahoma, especially out, not only going to classrooms, but going out to maneuvers out in the field, because I believe we were there for 3 or 4 months before I went on to my next assignment at Camp Rucker in Alabama, southern Alabama, right near Florida. Recollection is that I don't think we had air conditioning in the car, so by the time I got home, I can't recall. I think we were close enough that I even came home for lunch to break up the day for Mom. But when I got home at dinner time, the uniform was soaking wet. Well, here I am in Florida in March of '07, listening to the tapes for Blank Spots, And here I found one. And it may be cut out in mid-sentence because I'll go until it stops. It was very enjoyable in Lawton, Oklahoma, filling in for what I think I may have missed. And we were in a nice apartment and had good friends, old and new. It was really our honeymoon. And it was almost like college because I was in class or out in the field during the day while Mom could spend time with the girls. And we both reinforced our opinions that neither of us wanted to stay in the military. One of the experiences that Mom had was that she was in line at the checkout line in a PX, Post Exchange, where we did grocery shopping and everything else. And some woman came up and wanted to cut in front of her and said, well, my husband's a colonel. And she said, well, I really don't care that your husband is a colonel. Get in line behind me. She could be tough when she wanted to, when she had to. Being home during the day, she could spend time with the other ladies in the apartment complex and get familiarized with military activities. What I may have missed on a previous reiteration of a tape was that I think one of our first meals, if not the first meal, was when Mom had gone to the PX and gotten ham steak. Well, she wasn't that accomplished as a cook as her mother was.